have James Lee here. James, why don't you do your introduction? Tell everybody who you are, what you do. Give us a basic idea, brother.
Yeah, who I am. Well, I mean, I am sort of a nobody, I would say, but I'm a person that cares a lot about the country. I care a lot about people. So what I do is I try to find whatever's the truth wherever it might be. I try to find where there's corruption, where there's hypocrisy, where there are conflicts of interest, whether in our government, in corporations. And that is kind of my background. So I'm an MBA guy. I went to New York University and got my MBA there back in 2016 to 2018. And I was a management consultant for 4.5 years. I don't know if your audience is familiar with the work that we do, but basically we try to maximize corporate profits wherever we can find any kind of efficiencies. That's what we do, even if it is maybe not so good in the long run. And, I think right away I kind of had an inkling that this wasn't the right thing. But, when you're coming out of business school, I got to tell you, there's a lot of Kool-Aid drinking there going on, right? You're kind of in a one-track mind. You believe the gospel, their gospel specifically on hey, we're going to use business and we're going to solve all of the world's problems. Very much of that World Economic Forum, Davos type of attitude. I didn't know it at the time, but that's really what it was. And, I think very quickly when I was in there, I'm like, something's not right here. And I think it was more or less kind of COVID that really was the impetus to say, hey, I got to get out of here somehow. And so my journey, I just started basically posting YouTube videos online. I started doing that in 2020, May of 2020. So kind of right when COVID first hit and I got off the road, because before that I was traveling all the time. So in 2019, I think I spent 200 nights on the road. I think I had like almost 200 nights in hotels, just going to clients and things like that.
Did you enjoy that lifestyle, that on the road lifestyle? Like, do you got like a wife and kids? Obviously, probably not, right? I would imagine 200 days on the road.
Not at the time. And I actually, so when you first do it, I was coming out, I would say I was a young buck, but I really wasn't. I was 28, 29 at the time. And, I was single and I felt that was just like amazing. The first 6 months to a year, I was like, fuck yeah, I'm flying first class everywhere and I'm eating at the fucking finest restaurants you can find in whatever city that we're in. Sometimes they're in, middle of Kansas or wherever we were. And, I think that's part of the whole game, though, is that they make you feel like you're some important person and you're doing really important work, and you kind of get sucked into that. And a lot of people don't get out of that loop of, hey, I just need to, do the next thing, and I want to keep doing this and keep getting the perks and, have these fun, happy hours and corporate parties and all that stuff.
So it's like they reward and cater your ego for the predatory, capabilities, if you will.
Absolutely. Yeah. You got to justify what you're doing somehow, right? If you have, every night is basically could be a party night. I remember just, going out after, we'd work sometimes late, sometimes not late, but regardless, we hit the bar, the hotel, we go to some restaurant and, we just charge up whatever tab it is, find some way to expense it.
Right. Yeah. Let's do about 15 minutes worth of business here.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember this one trip where we flew out to Japan for almost no reason whatsoever, to be quite honest with you. And we had maybe a few hours of meetings and we had, 4 days of just kicking around in Tokyo and Kyoto. We just, went out partying, did karaoke in Japan. And I was just like, it was very new to that whole thing. I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. But then after a little bit, I started to realize, oh, what am I doing in order to get these perks? Do you know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, you got to start looking at yourself in the mirror and deciding if that's the man you can be.
Yeah, and I think it really was honestly COVID. Like my awakening during COVID, I don't know about you, but I'd be curious to hear what you think. But my awakening was, wow, this is the first time that I've seen, or the realization, I guess, that maybe the corporation isn't like a family, or it isn't like your, it isn't the savior of the
Yeah,
world,
it's
man.
not
I
looking
could
out
see,
for your best interest, right? Those
absolutely
profits
not.
back there.
Yeah, because they always say, hey, this is the way. If you maximize profit, that whole thing will go to the worker, and you kind of bought into that stuff. In business, I remember in business school we took a class, and they talked about union busting, and I think a lot of people have different thoughts about unions, whether they're corrupt or whether they're doing what they're supposed to do. But what the function of a union really is to have, to collectively bargain for the worker. So I think it should exist. And we just had classes, it's like, oh, here's how you would union bust. And it was kind of just like an aside, just by the way, this is something you should know. And we did have one business ethics class back in business school. And it was 3 weekends, half days, and then you're done.
Nice. A lot of time there, huh?
Yeah.
So then what? COVID comes along and you're just kind of like, hey, maybe these guys aren't,
Well, I started, so COVID comes along, so I'm doing these videos. So I'm not traveling anymore because we're all shut down. There's no visiting clients. And so I'm just in my apartment. And I started, okay, I have a lot more free time, because I used to travel all the time and eat up a lot of time. And so now I have all this, more time in my hands. So I said, okay, I'm going to try to do a video a week on whatever topic I could find. And so I just started making videos, and they're not very good videos. I got to be honest with you. I can't watch it back. But it was like the start of my awakening, kind of, red pilling, if you want to use the Matrix example of saying, and you just pull threads and you see like one after another, and it's like a never ending thing. And that's kind of what got me to where I was today. So then I got connected with the people at Breaking Points. They do great work. I don't know how familiar
I
your audience.
used to watch them all the time. Crystal and Saj.
Crystal and Saagar. So big shout out to them. I really appreciate them for kind of taking me under their wing a little bit and giving me a platform, because it was about, maybe I would say, a year and a half into me posting videos. I got a DM from Saagar one day, and he just said, hey, I really like the videos you're making. I think you're a smart guy. You have great editorial decisions, and you want to come make videos for us? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So that's how I got started. And credit to them. I have, in their platform so far, 100% editorial freedom. And that was really important to me. I think to them too. And the funny thing about editorial freedom is like, you have 100% editorial freedom until you don't.
Right. Exactly. No, I agree. Which I wanted to touch base with you on, because I was watching a lot of your 5150 videos, off your channel.
5149. 5149.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's Corey. What's it called? 5150. But yeah. So I was looking at that. Do you do your own editing?
Yeah, I do 100% of everything.
Yeah, dude. So as I've looked into you, like, one of the things was just kind of like analyzing the way you put your videos together, your long form and your short form, and like you understand what you're doing. It's well done stuff. Like your soundtracks and the way you compose your long form stuff, especially, brother, it has all the elements of the old school, like Nightline investigative journalism, but it has that breath of youth and fresh air. You know what I mean? It's not stale and overdone, and you give it the right kind of energy.
I appreciate that. And that's something I'm still learning how to do that. And if you watch my early stuff, I was just talking to a camera, and also the editing. So I learned all the editing as well over time. And you got to kind of play to your strengths, because I got to be honest with you. I'm not a very good and eloquent speaker. I'm not one of those guys that could just riff off the cuff and have something coherent come out. So all those videos, so I've thought about it and I've researched it extensively. I know And I think you have to, if you want to make like a good point, at least for me, I got to sit down, I got to write it out, I got to think about it, because I'm taking sometimes a position on something, or I'm not one of those guys that I don't like to just kind of react to the news as it's coming out in an emotional way. I'm really trying to analyze, hey, is this good or is this bad? What are the effects of this long term? And so I sit down, and every one of those pieces I sit down, I write it out. What are my thoughts? And that's how I put it together. And so it's a long process. And I wish I was one of those guys that could just spitball it and then freewheel and done. And so I'm looking to do more of that kind of stuff where it's like investigative, because that's like where it's at, is like trying to find out more information, right? It's not just regurgitation of other
Copy
people's
and paste
points.
journalism.
Right. It's like that's how the mainstream news does. It's like you see one article and you notice like 7 articles from different news sources are saying the exact same thing. And it's just kind of like, oh, okay, you guys are just covering copies. For me, it's like always the curiosity of trying to find new information or learn, myself what it is, versus like just being told, hey, this is the way you should think. I like to, even in ideas that I don't agree with. Like right now I'm looking into some. So I've always, been one where like I'm a big health guy, working out, 5 days a week minimum. I'm cutting like processed foods out of the diet. And, I see these folks who are like pro Ozempic or, just intuitive eating. I'm like, if I intuitively ate, I would just never stop. I would just eat hamburgers. Right. It doesn't make any sense. But then I think, okay, let me hear you out. Look, tell me about intuitive eating and why it makes sense to you. And then I can make up my mind about it. So like, I don't reject any ideas, any theories right off the bat. I always like to hear it out.
Yeah, no, that's it works for you so I learned about you through a recommendation of Ian had did online, right?
Ian is incredible.
He basically said, if I remember correctly, basically he's just like me except he's Asian and less hair. I think that was almost verbatim, right? So I go and I look at your content and I start watching. I'm like, holy shit, this is really good, and I get it because you have a similar method, I guess I would say, as Ian. In a way, and what I mean by that is it appears that you guys are really good at taking complex topics and finding a way to boil that down and present it to the everyday person who may not be informed on those matters, and do it in a way that's not overwhelming or unapproachable. And that's why I told you you're at the start of a revolution, brother. Like that type of capability to articulate that, to express ideas in that manner, like that can't be understated. There's something magical in that, and I think that's why you guys are having the response. You especially, I'm watching your numbers, blow up. I didn't know much about you from your TikTok side, but on your I'm seeing your X presence just explode, and obviously for good reason.
Thank you. And I got to thank Ian for that, because he is like kind of the OG guy of like kind of do your own research, at least from the TikTok. And that's why I first met him, and I interviewed him. I think it was like, I don't know, maybe almost a year ago at this point, because I saw his stuff. I was like, this is incredible. He was talking about BlackRock, and I had my show on Breaking Points, or my segment. I was like, hey, you got to come on here and we got to dive into BlackRock a little bit. And so I'm very appreciative of like all the good stuff he says about me, because when I look at his stuff, like the way I look at his stuff, I was like, wow, that's an awesome video, or that's how you communicate. Because it's like, he's not necessarily, it's not force fed, right? The points are very clear, but he's not saying, hey, there's no shame involved. There's no kind of good and bad. It's just like, hey, here's like information that you got to know about.
Right. Yeah, open your eyes. Here it is. These are the sources. This is the story. If any of it sounds weird to you, look into it yourself.
Exactly. And I think part of it, at least for me, comes from the fact that I am more or less at this point, in terms of like electoral politics, pretty politically homeless. So I don't have any allegiance to say, hey, X person has to be elected, or we have to go down this path, or the country's going to blow up. I'm more of the, I just try to, basically, because I'm a curious person, so I try to find information that I find to be like that I'm interested in, and I learn about it, and then I try to then disseminate that information. And I don't know if it's good or bad, because some people say, hey, you're causing all kinds of problems. I've been accused of all kinds of things. And so I'm just like, everything I say, it's based in research. So if it's not good, then that means that you have a different agenda than me. I understand, right? If you're trying to get, let's say, Joe Biden elected, okay, so then you have that perspective that you're going for. And so something I'm saying definitely won't be able, it's not going to contribute to that cause, but that's not my cause, though.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, man. And I think the way you are able to uh, do your work in the way you do, present stories and concepts and ideas to people. And I think that brings more people into the fold, right? And when more people are in the fold, then you have more people looking, right? And when more people are looking, it's harder for corruption, or it's at least harder for that corruption to go, unnoticed. So that's
Yes.
like another brilliant thing on it. You were saying?
That I was going to piggyback off. So one of my things is, when you start out as like a creator, or you can call me a journalist, whatever you want to call me, you start out as a person who's putting content out. Nobody cares. There's nobody watching you. And so one of the things that really resonated with me was this line. I don't know who initially said it, but I saw a tweet. It was, I think it was Marianne Williamson who tweeted this out. And it said, every time you tell the truth, you do your bit to weaken the lie.
Okay.
And so at least that was something. It was like, for me, it's like, it's overwhelming. If you're trying to like change the world or do all this kind of grandiose stuff, I don't think it's not going to come from me personally. But the thing I could do is I could put out the stuff that I know about to the audience that wants to receive it. And every time you do that, it kind of works a little bit. Because like recently, so the other day I put out, and the thing is, it's not even my original work, right? It's like I watched this 4-part series, Al Jazeera documentary called The Lobby, and it's about how it's an undercover investigation about the Israel lobby, and it was released back in 2018, but it was actually blocked. Al Jazeera wasn't allowed to release it, and then it had to be leaked through a back channel, and it's on the YouTube channel for Electronic Intifada. I would encourage people to watch it. But there was just so many like moments from that. I'm like, dude, because I haven't seen it. I don't know if that many people have seen it. So I'm just like, hey, by the way, this is something that they're doing, or they've done for many years. Check it out. And it kind of blew up. It's not even my post originally blowing up. It's like, I posted out there, somebody else sees it. They have a much larger audience than me. They post it, and then that's how it grows. That's how this information grows. And then now I think people will go, because I don't know if that many people want to sit down and watch a 4-part series about the Israel lobby. It's just not the way that a lot of people like to spend their time. But if I could get, a minute and a half out of it and say, hey, this is the stuff that they're doing, I think that's impactful.
And I think it's important. So I'm an old school dinosaur, right? I'm not a TikTok guy. It just wasn't me. I'm not even a YouTube Shorts guy. You know what I mean? It's really hard for me to want to focus my mind strictly for a minute, minute and a half on time, right? But I do understand that the generation coming up is used to that. They're used to the sound bites. They're looking for the maximum amount of information you can convey to them, and you got about a minute, minute and a half to do it before they turn you off. So that is the reality, you know. I I I notice like especially your short form content. It's also the whole thing is stimulating, right? Like when I'm watching your thing, you're bouncing around the screen, something new's popping up there, a new piece of information's hitting, like extreme. Explain that layout, that process of how you deliver that.
Yeah. So all of the short form content is pre-scripted. It's like I design it exactly in that way, where it can and has to be very stimulating, because that's kind of unfortunately the game that you play. As you say, you're competing for people's attention, and I want people to hear my message selfishly, but also I think it's an important message. And the way I design, so basically I write out, so first how I do it is I kind of write out my thoughts of, just brain dump onto a notepad. It's like, okay, here's kind of the thing that I want to say. And then and I fill it in with the appropriate research. That's what actually, that's one way I do it. The other way could be I found something specific, and then now I need to develop a whole story. So there could be different ways. So it could be a point that, hey, I want to make this point. How do I make this point most effectively? Or I have a piece of information, and then how do I make this piece of information contextually relevant to a lot of people?
Okay.
And yes, you're talking about the screen. So I don't stay on any. So especially for the TikTok, or now the stuff that I'm posting on X, I don't stay with one frame for more than like 10 or 15 seconds. It has to change frames. My like the way my face bounces around. So it's very deliberate. It's like I'm this part of the screen, and then I'm over here, and now there's a green screen behind me. And so like every 10 to 15 seconds is like the frame changes. And so, but it changes in like, I think it's a non-jarring change. It's like, oh, okay, it's just flowing. So I'm glad somebody's noticing the art form here.
Yeah, no, dude, I'm telling you, like your work is brilliant. Not just the subject matter, but the way you present it. And I'm not saying that to dick ride you. I'm telling you that because it's legit, right? Like when I'm watching your long form videos, right? I'm watching the way, like, you know, you'll have it set up where you got your black backdrop behind you and you're talking, right? And a lot of people might have an ego and like that camera is going to be on them for a minute. They're going to do a bunch of trickery and whatnot. But you use that as an opportunity, I see, to like as a cut, so people will see you and you'll communicate with your audience. But then you'll keep the audio track going while you're throwing the B-round footage backdrop to build the narrative and the exposition, you know? So, and then while that's going on, you'll have this like really good musical tone or beat or something going to keep somebody engaged. So when I say like it's masterfully done, I mean it's masterfully done. I'm watching the shit you're putting together and I get it, and it's fucking beautiful, brother. So
Thank you. And I'm still, it's an art form, and art's never finished, and so I'm always getting better at it. And I got to make a confession. One of the reasons why I started doing things in that way is because of my weaknesses. So I think what I'm strong in is potentially like thinking about stuff, research, but what I'm not very good at, I got to be honest, is like just going off the cuff and saying things. So I have to be, so a lot of times I do those cuts because it helps facilitate if I mess up or something, then I could cut it out and I have B-roll over it. Versus like if I'm doing, I don't think like I could not be a newscaster. That's a completely different art form. If you're talking about like, you know, one of those anchor guys that are out there reading it and they got one shot at it, no chance, at least for me right now. Maybe if I practiced it for a while, I could maybe do it. But at this point, it's not in my wheelhouse. I gotta be honest. And I think we all have the strengths and weaknesses.
but you're able to recognize that, right? So you recognize it and you're able to play to it and you're able to put it together in a manner that works, right? So you're like, okay, I don't want to be the guy who's front and center of the screen the whole time, right? I don't feel comfortable. I'm probably gonna fumble it up, so I'll do this. And let's see, sorry, buddy, I just brain stroke out on me, right? But the main point being is, you know, like you can use it for a cut in. You can use it as a undertone of explaining information and keeping, you know, the things flowing. Like you get that it doesn't work for you. You still found a way to do it to get past, you know, the mental block, you know, which is dope. Which, if you don't mind a segue, because I'm actually glad everything fell the way it did, because I want to segue this concept into TikTok and the TikTok ban and all the fuckery that's going on with that. And I would like you to just start from any point you want and just kind of lay out your case or your belief or your understanding, whatever it is, and I'm going to kind of sit back and listen.
Sure. TikTok. So, I mean, for the audience, it is being banned. So one of the things that I think our congressional members like to say that it's not a ban, it is a divestment. I don't find that particularly convincing because I don't think China or ByteDance is going to sell. So there's a lot of layers to this, but I don't think they're going to sell it. It is in so many levels, even if they divest, it's like, what right do you have for them to divest? So I think there's a couple thoughts I have about this. TikTok is I think in terms of popularity, probably the only social media app that has a considerable following that is not US based. I think everything else has been developed by the United States, whether it be all the meta products, Instagram, Facebook, or Google, YouTube, or sorry, Instagram is Facebook. So Google has YouTube, and then Twitter. I know Musk has bought it, but it's still very much like a U.S. based. And this is the only one that made it, because what happens in the United States is any nascent app that's starting to gain popularity, it gets scooped up by one of these companies. They don't have a chance to grow and proliferate. It doesn't happen. And so there's been no competition in social media here for a decade, right? You got the main players and they're here. And so now all of a sudden you got this app coming from overseas in China, and they figured something out. I don't know. I'm not a tech guy. I don't know the algorithm and how it really works as far as the programming behind it, but they seem to kind of figure out a way to capture attention and give you content that you like. And it's different. It actually feels different. So because I try to go on Instagram Reels, it doesn't really feel the same. It's not the same vibe. So I think from a competition standpoint, there's certainly incentive for U.S. companies to want to ban TikTok. For example, Facebook, it came out, I'm sure you've heard about this a couple years ago, where they hired specific people to disparage TikTok as a very dangerous place for kids. They hired some group to kind of throw it out there in the media and run these studies or whatever that says, hey, their content is harmful for kids. When in reality, I think social media in general for kids is pretty bad. I didn't grow up with social media, but I don't think, like, if I was like 12, 14 years old and I needed to like be cool and compete for attention. I mean, like, school in itself was like hard enough, kind of being in there was already challenging for me personally. Like, if you imagine you had to build an online persona where people had to like you and stuff like that, that's no good, I think, for the development in terms of you going through puberty, all kinds of stuff is happening. So my position is that I don't think social media is good for anybody at that age. And even for adults, it's a hard thing to manage as well. So there's that incentive from I think a business and economic perspective, and Facebook is one of the big lobbies in Congress, right? They're a very powerful group. They have all kinds of connections. So I could see that pressure coming on. I think that's part of it. And what I've been talking about more recently is that Israel stuff with AIPAC wanting to ban it. And I think that's where it ties back to, hey, this is an app that, because it wasn't homegrown here in the United States, I think AIPAC historically, I would argue it's changed now, but historically has not had that influence. I mean, we have, I'm speaking of AIPAC, but I'm speaking more broadly of like pro-Israel lobby or pro-Israel. They call them civil rights organizations, but they're kind of like intelligence. They're spying on people, like the ADL, right? So you've had, the CEO of the ADL just out, in the public saying, hey, yeah, we work with all these platforms. We make them change their algorithm to suit us, whatever. I mean, they say it's because it's to protect Jewish people. I don't believe that. I think it's to protect Israel. And so we have that open knowledge of that. And here's an app that in the past hasn't been that way. I felt it. I think you've talked to Ian about this, but I think TikTok is now, because they want to survive in the U.S., is one of the most censored apps out there, right? I have to be very careful what I'm saying. And that it challenges me too. I'm like, I have to find sources of this information that they can't say it's misinformation. Right. So I have to be really smart about it, because I think at this point, every video I post, they say it's misinformation or it's violating community guidelines, and I appeal it. And usually it gets restored. But every single time, without fail, it gets flagged. And I try. So my goal is like to not have it flagged as soon, because whenever they flag it, basically that video is killed. Okay. It's really hard for it to go viral after they flag it. Right. So then I'm finding all kinds of push it as hard or what? Exactly. So then I try to find a way where at least I'm going to try to get by what I think is their AI algorithm, and so then it goes viral for a little bit, and then it gets cut off at some point, because people can report your video. You can get mass reported. And I think that's happened to big accounts like Ian's account. He always gets reported by people, and his videos get taken down, or at least they're flagged for a little bit. And I apologize for not telling this story in a linear way, because we're talking about the TikTok ban, and now we're talking about
Say it any way you want it. That's the magic of it,
Yeah.
man. Just have fun.
Okay.
Go.
So I think as of late, there is evidence of a strong dislike from pro-Israel groups of TikTok, right? They're saying, you have Nikki Haley, big Apex recipient, in a presidential debate saying, hey, TikTok got to go because not necessarily China, but because it's super anti-Semitic. It's more anti-Semitic than any other app. And she's saying that the more you watch, the more anti-Semitic you become, blah, blah, blah. And then you have Jonathan Greenblatt, ADL, saying, hey, we got a big TikTok problem, right? It's not a left or right divide. You've probably heard that leak. Not a left or right divide. It's a generational divide. It's a TikTok problem. So we got to legislate against that. And so, yeah, do I think there's some, this is obviously a conspiracy theory, but do I think the politicians have the ear of AIPAC and say, hey, this has got to go? Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of the China issue, right, data privacy, I'm a big believer in data privacy. Like I talk about that a lot. And do I think China's stealing the data? Yeah, I think China is stealing the data from TikTok 100%. But so is Facebook is selling that data.
Right.
They're just monetizing that. So Facebook's selling it, Google's selling, everybody in the US is selling data to China. And so what we need is a data privacy law that's a federal law that protects all Americans' privacies regardless of the company. You shouldn't get preferential treatment because you're a US company and you want to and you want to monetize your users' data at the expense of the national security of this country. Why do they get to do that?
Isn't it amazing how corporations hijacked the 14th Amendment? Like something that was supposed to help outlaw slavery all of a sudden gave corporations this ability to just beat everybody with a stick.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a separate issue, but I'm a believer in labor rights. I think people, no matter what job you do, you should be able to do it with dignity. That's really important to me, right? It doesn't matter if you're a janitor. You could be the best janitor of all time. And there's 3 or 4 companies, Amazon, Trader Joe's, I can't remember a couple of the other ones, but right now they're suing to basically say that the NLRB is unconstitutional. So the governing body itself is unconstitutional, which I find to be absurd. So there's a body that's been created back in the 30s to enforce labor laws. They're not necessarily creating new law. They're just enforcing law and say, hey, this enforcement is not right because then it violates, what do they say? It violates our, the right to a fair trial. And I can't remember which. You're maybe better with the amendments than me.
I think that's the Equal Protection Clause.
Equal Protection Clause. And so I find that to be absurd. But then back on to the TikTok. Yeah, I think China's taking the data, but I think we gotta be honest with the American people and say, hey, either we protect Americans or we just say, hey, no, we're selling out and anybody has free access to your data. This is purely like an economics play, or it's a play to protect Israel from criticism or lessen their criticism. I think you just got to be honest. And some rebuttals I got, because I do engage with some people on this kind of stuff, and they're saying, hey, I'd be curious hear what your take is, and I'll give you my take. But people make the analogy, hey, in the 1930s, let's say it's 1937, 38, would you want, Hitler to be in control of the BBC? Or now they say, hey, what if Russia would buy the New York Times right now? Do you want that?
I mean, ideally the answer is no, right? But at the same, yeah, ideally no, you don't want your enemy running everything, but, at the same point, I guess don't centralize your news sources either.
And so I agree with you, right? It's not ideal for what you would call a foreign adversary. I think we make these, that's a whole different rabbit hole to go down, is why are they our foreign adversaries? Like, what have we done to create that juggernaut? Is it really because they're adversaries, or because we just kind of need this, we got to feed the military industrial cause? There's got to be an enemy. If we don't have an enemy, then we don't have, what's the point of all the war machine?
Right.
But what I would say to that argument is that is a conflation of what is going on, because here's the right analogy should be, what if, let's say in 1937, Germany, Hitler, Nazi Germany created a news organization that was more popular than the BBC, that the British people wanted to watch more than the BBC. That is what's going on right now with TikTok, because TikTok didn't get any preferential treatment here in the United States. They just created a product that people wanted to use. And so that would say, hey, what happens then if in the past, that's the analogy, is if some foreign entity created a product that your countrymen liked more. That's what's going on. And here's the difference in how you would handle it is we supposedly purport to be a free market democracy. So we need to fight this with free market democratic principles, not authoritarian shutdowns. Because this is basically because people also say, hey, China doesn't allow, U.S. social media companies in, which is true. But China doesn't pretend to be a democracy. They say, hey, we're an authoritarian regime here. We get to do whatever we feel like is the best thing to do. And that's not, as far as I see the United States, that's not how we operate, or that's not how we say we operate, even though there's evidence of some of these types of things. So then we need to come up with a solution that is morally consistent to our values.
So what would you say to like the criticisms that say, hey, like there are certain inherent threats with things like TikTok, like if you take that algorithm and you start beaming, pro-trans rationalism around to the youth, then you're going to see a jump socially, of, this from here to here, and you see that. What do you, I guess the real question is, what do you say to the criticism that, the algorithm is actually being used to target the youth for things that are clearly unhealthy or unbeneficial to them? So, that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's what algorithms do. I think algorithms are a reflection of what people want to see. I don't think algorithms are force-feeding content that people don't want to see. That's why I think it works. And this is from a non-programmer's perspective, is that I think it's a reflection of the audience. So if that's happening, I don't know if that's happening on TikTok, whether they're feeding people, basically trans grooming type of messages. I'm not sure. But if it is, it's because it's already there, right? There's already something on the ground that's happening within the schools themselves. And I don't want to get into all this trans stuff, but I think there is some kind of complex here. I call it, there's a military industrial complex. I do think that there is some kind of, and this is going to be controversial to say, but there is some kind of like complex where you would encourage people to be more queer or like experiment with those kinds of things. And there's, and I'll give you why I think that is because, for example, because we have all these organizations that exist. So let's say, for example, like, should gay people be able to be married? Yeah, absolutely. Gay people, they should be able to do whatever they want. I'm very social libertarian in that sense. Like, I don't give a shit, like, what people do with their own lives. And so there's these organizations that have developed with real jobs, real incomes, real power that have come up for the last 2 decades. Let's say, I think it's been longer, but let's say the last decade, they've really gained prominence, and you have these organizations that are fighting for, equality for, gay marriage. And now that that's achieved, okay, now we got, what are these? It's just go home, like we don't have a job anymore. No, we have to continue this. It's the same as the military. We got to find new wars. We got to find other ways to keep us employed. So now it's like, okay, what's the next cause we got to do? Oh, we got to get this cause. We got to get the trans. We got to get the athletes. We got to do this and that. So I do think there's this kind of dark money, these like nonprofit organizations that are doing things on the ground that are impacting, real people. And then those things, like, actually, I think do matter because you're taught this, and then now all of a sudden it becomes a social thing in school. Thank goodness no kids, but I'm sure that it's super cool to be like, oh, I'm experimenting young, and I don't care if people experiment, but I'm just saying I think there is a deliberate movement to like get that experimentation to the more of the forefront. I don't know if you would agree with me, or I don't know if the audience would agree, but I think there's definitely some evidence of that. You know what I'm saying with this kind of everything is like some complex. Like you have this kind of queer complex. You have, let's say, the homelessness industrial complex. It's almost like we need the homeless people, so these people who are so-called fighting the homeless have jobs, because there's they're built their whole career off of that, and if you say, oh, we solved it, and then you have to go find something else to do.
Well, then, yeah, and who else is going to scare everybody else to showing up to their jobs, from 9 to 5, Carlin had a nice bit about that back in the day, like the homeless people are really just there to scare the shit out of the middle class and let you know you don't want to end up here,
Yeah, and I got to be honest with you, if there was no corruption in society or government or business, I would gladly not do this. This is not I would say this isn't my favorite. Or I'm really passionate about what I'm doing right now, but would I just rather not have to think about the atrocities of the world or how people are getting, fucked over? Yeah, I would rather just do like a regular thing and enjoy my life. And so I have no problem. Like if there's no more, it's like if I trade, I have no more. I can't make a living at doing what I'm doing, but there's no more corruption. I'll do that trade. And it's like, okay, I'll find something else to do, because I'm a curious guy, right? I can find enjoyment in many different activities, and so I'll just go do something else.
What about these protests? What's your view and your perception on these protests, like going on at Columbia and Harvard?
Which protests? Are you talking about the student protests on campus, or?
Yes.
Yeah, I have no problem with the student protests on campus. I think you should be able to protesting is literally the First Amendment. It's in the Constitution. You should be able to, it's a protected right that you should have. Now, is it uncomfortable? Is it controversial? Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know exactly. I haven't been on the ground, unfortunately, at these locations to see what the truth is, but there's certainly all kinds of media manipulation happening right now, whether, I see videos out there of Jewish people just doing Shabbat dinner, they're doing all kinds of, Passover celebration that seems very peaceful. Then you also see the other side of shouting profanities and all this other stuff. And I don't know how much of that is manipulated, which is why I took that clip out of the lobby. I'm like, hey, there's probably some agent provocateurs. Is that how you say it?
Provocateurs.
Provocateurs, yeah, out there doing stuff. And one point that I think it was Crystal Ball, she made this on one of the recent shows at Breaking Point. It's like, hey, all of those quote unquote anti-Semitic incidents have happened off campus, not actually on campus in the quad, which is where the students are. They you could send somebody that looks like they're dressed like a protester, and you could go next to Columbia and you could just say some shit, and then the media will capture that because that's what they do. And then they'll say, hey, look at what's happening over here. Okay. And so it's super easy to paint, all these protests in a bad light. But I will make a distinguishment. I don't know if you saw that Golden Gate protest, the way they blocked the bridge.
The bridge, yeah, I saw that. That pisses me off.
Did you see that?
You can't block people's movement in my opinion.
So that I'm not supportive of, because that's actually, and I know protest is supposed to disrupt, but I'm not supportive of that, because you're disrupting the wrong people. If you want to go disrupt, yeah, go into the halls of Congress, not condoning January 6th or anything like that, but legally go in there and harass your congressman like some people do and say, hey, what are you doing about this bill, or blah, blah, blah. You can go talk to them because they're your congressman. You should go inconvenience those people. Don't inconvenience people who are just trying to go on with their daily lives. What I think they should have done, I'll tell you what they think. I think they should have done is, there's walkways on both sides of the Golden Gate Bridge. Line those walkways with banners, all kinds of stuff. So when people are driving by, they say, hey, stuff is happening in Gaza. They're killing babies. They're dropping bombs everywhere. That people will still get the message and say, oh, something's happening here.
Yes.
Let me maybe we'll look into that later, and not be just pissed that, they're stuck on the bridge for 8 hours.
I would agree with that analysis, because I can tell you, for me, the doesn't matter what your cause is. If you start restricting the liberty of my movement, because of what you feel, that's just going to piss me off and create an adversarial relationship, right? But like you said, if you have that shit plastered all over the bridge and I got to go past that multiple times a day to and from work or whatever, yeah, you're going to get your message across, and maybe at some point I'll either agree with you or maybe I won't. But I'm not going to be pissed off at you for fucking stopping me from going where I got to go.
That's right. And I think that's where, I've never, I don't really see myself honestly as an activist. I'm more of a guy that's like I'm research. I'm more of on the journalistic side of that. I like to get the information out there. I'm not, because when you become an activist, there's a different mindset. I think it's because you're more like, hey, I have to achieve this cause, and so then you start making decisions that maybe if you took a step back would be okay. That's not necessarily the best way to go about that, to build the largest coalition possible, right? Because that's the whole goal is that when you become so, I think, tunnel vision, you start to lose some of the bigger picture. But that's just my perspective. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's just my psychoanalysis. That's from I don't have credentials in anything. I mean, I do have I have a credential in business, so I should be able to run a large corporate. That's my credential, and I can tell you this, man, the people I've sat in, not too many, but I've sat in a couple of boardroom CEO kind of meetings, and they're not really as smart as you think they are, or they don't know as much as people think. The stuff that goes on in there is wild.
Are there any? I mean, obviously outside of the situation going on with Israel and Gaza and the U.S. and are there any major stories that are happening that you think people aren't really dialed into? They're completely unaware of. Like anything you want to point out?
Well, there's stories, everywhere, but I think for me, how I got started in this, because I was working, as a management consultant, is that one of the biggest rots in the country is more or less just this financialization of every business, where it's no longer a business. You're not really even trying to make anything. You're just trying to make, other than money. You don't make any products anymore. And that's one of the things. So I was consulting, and it was for this pharmaceutical company. I can't say exactly which one it is, but it's one that one of the companies where you had to, they more or less really highly recommended their product to you over the last 4 years. And what they're trying to figure out how to do is make drugs without actually making any of the drugs. And so we analyzed a bunch of other competitor companies, and I saw this company. It's a different company now. This is a competitor, and I was looking at the data, and I'm like, how does this company have no inventory? And that was my special. I was a supply chain specialist. So I'm like, how does this company have, let's say, I don't know what the number is. Let's say 500 million in revenue for this product, no inventory. I'm like, how is that possible? And then I looked into it further. I was like, oh, well, it's because they don't actually, it's a game. They did some kind of divestment where they don't actually own any of the factories or the warehouses. And it just basically, right before they sell it, it hits their books for like a day, and then it's off in the market, which then makes your Wall Street numbers look really good, because that means you're able to make a lot of money without any assets. Because you don't want to, because Wall Street, there's a thing that they like now where it's just asset light businesses. Same thing. That's basically what happened to Boeing, is that they really wanted to go after this asset light model where you don't make any of the stuff. You just outsource everything. In the end, then you sell. You're like a marketing product. You're a marketing company.
Didn't the movie industry do things very similar, like in the 80s with like I don't know if you're familiar with movies or whatnot, but like the original Terminator and whatnot, you would have these companies like Orion Picture that would come in just long enough to like drop a movie and get out, whether it made money or lost money or whatever. Instead,
that I'm not now. You piqued my interest. I'm gonna have to look into that now, because I hadn't heard about that. And the difference between that is like when you're talking about movies versus like real manufacturing or like drug production. I'm like, do you really? And I think this is one of the things that eventually got me in trouble with the management consulting firm, is I basically said in front of these guys that are pretty high up, I'm like, hey, you're kind of like talking about outsourcing the main component of your drug here. You're basically giving up control of the main of your product to your earnings look slightly better, and now you're exposed. If something happens, let's say there's a safety issue, right? Something happens, and then you're compromised. And I think there is things that like you should not compromise when it comes to, if speaking of national security, I don't think you should compromise the country's like manufacturing capabilities. I think that's something that needs to be invested in, right? It's the same. It's like when people talk about it, like, oh, roads like should be privatized or whatever. I was like, we need roads, even if you don't want it. If you don't have any, if you only build roads if So what I'm trying to say is, if you only have the roads that people pay for, then your infrastructure is going to suck, because then you're not going to be able to get anywhere. And now you won't be able to compete. Now, the way I think America has competed in the last, century is because of heavy investment in public infrastructure that anybody can take advantage of. But we have to agree that to keep that going. And I know this is getting into more of that, I don't know what you would call this, more socialist type of mentality, but I don't really have an ideology, to be quite honest with you. Like, people ask me, it's like, are you leftist? Are you socialist? Are you on the right? I'm like, I'm nothing. I look at this particular thing, and I see, and I try to research and say, hey, what is the outcome? If you make this decision, what's the outcome going to be? And whether I like that outcome or not, then I go with that policy.
Yeah, so you actually take the time to think it through and consider it. What a novel approach,
Instead of just saying, oh, I'm on the left, so therefore I should believe this, or I'm on the right, so therefore.
Right. Tribal, decision making, and like you said earlier, emotionally led.
Yeah. So to answer, I know it's a long way to answer a very drawn out question, but I think that's something that is just boring to talk about a little bit, honestly. Like, Boeing has gotten some coverage of it just because it's really impactful. Like, when a plane crash, when a door blows out, people are like, what the fuck just happened there? So it's a bit more visible, but this is happening in every single industry. And safety is being compromised all over the place. I mean, I saw when I was doing my work, because I was specifically, supply chain. So I touched a lot of the stuff that was tangible. And I would be, our directive would be like, you need to cut, X dollars off of the balance sheet. And then I would just, then my job would be to go to all these factories and be like, all right, we got to find places to cut. And then the workers are great people. And they're like, hey, if we cut, like, we're at risk for not, delivering next year. Like, our whole manufacturing line could be shut down next year. If we have any kind of supply shock, and this was before COVID, right? Ironically, it's like, if we have any kind of supply shock or disruption, we're at risk. So, like, we want to keep this as backup so we could be ready for anything that happens, which is very reasonable, right?
No, it's interesting. You're definitely a kind of guy who thinks things through, likes to run it through the path, which is nice. I had a question, but
Go for it. Oh, you forgot.
Because I was listening and I didn't want to get caught up in holding the question. That's where are you looking to see yourself in the future, James? Like, are you looking to really kind of launch and run off with your own brand, or are you just going where things take you? Like, what's next?
It's hard to say exactly. Well, so I do know I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing, right? Just putting in the grunt work. I don't have any targets in mind of like, my aspiration is not to, let's say, become like a mainstream broadcaster or talking head guy that has, gets the big contract. That's really not something that I desire to or will do. What my thing is, I hope people appreciate the work that I put out, and I'm just going to keep doing it. And what I do hope to do is like, hey, if I get more resources, the better work that I'm going to be able to do, the more I'm able to invest back in. If I want to travel somewhere to do a story, I want resources to be able to do that versus always, now I think it's part of the limitation of like money, right? Is like, I don't have all those opportunities, but like, hopefully through time, to get an audience that's big enough to support doing better and better work and seeing where that takes me. But I'm always 100% always going to be independent. I really don't see myself giving up any kind of editorial freedom or any even security, just be like, oh, I'm a part of like the New York Times or whatever. Don't think that's never, I'm not going to say that unequivocally. It's not one of those people who are like, are you going to run for president? And they say no. But we'll see kind of. It's like, I definitely will not be joining any of those organizations because I think I'm too much of like a troublemaker or whatever to even work in those things. Because when in the past, I got in trouble all the time at my job just for like speaking out in meetings, or like they'd be like, "Hey, you can't talk to a partner like that." I'm like, "Why the fuck not? You know, he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. He doesn't know what he's saying, so I need to say something." And so, always had a problem with authority.
Kind of that ingrained aspect of like when you see something that you feel like is an injustice, or that someone's clearly full of shit and misleading people, that you got to be like, whoa, 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 hold up.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've always had a problem with authority. I think since I was a kid, I don't think it's necessary. It doesn't even have to be injustice. Injustice would be like a good way of a more generous way to put it. But it could just be anything. It's like, hey, we're trying to get this project done, and they're dicking around, and not. If I feel like what you're doing right now doesn't make any sense, I'm going to say it out loud, regardless of whether or not where you are in the chain of command. So like when I would speak to partners in the same way where I would speak to, like, let's say somebody I was managing in terms of the information. I would never like hold my tongue and say, "Oh, we shouldn't say that," or "We shouldn't challenge that." I'd be like, "Hey, this doesn't look right." I mean, because they can still, it's like, I will tell you, it's like, you still do whatever you want to do after that, but I'm going to tell you first that I don't agree with that. I'm going to dissent.
I think more people should kind of speak what they feel as opposed to harboring it inside and having, an argument with themselves, when really they would have felt better if they just stood up and said the thing they wanted to say.
Yeah. And I don't think everybody can do that, right? If you, like, let's say you have a family, you got to support, and same with like the Boeing whistleblower guys, right? It's like they've taken such a huge personal hit, including and up to death, for raising their hand and trying to say, hey, we got to fix what we're doing over here. And so I get the personal costs, and so I don't really necessarily fault people if they don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it.
Do you think the country is being liquidated by the?
That's what it feels like. That's what it feels like. It feels like everything is for sale, and it feels like we're on like a sinking ship here, and I'm trying to, like, you got the water coming in from, and I have like a little bucket, and I'm just trying to throw the water back out, and it's kind of a negative way to. I don't think it's like beyond repair necessarily, but I think it needs to change, because if you're talking about just giving up all kinds of the infrastructure, right? One of the other things too that I think would be a controversial topic that I think is important would be the defunding of public schools, right? A lot of people love that school choice. I think that's more of that Moms for Liberty kind of thing, where you're talking about public tax dollars going to private schools, right? They're calling it a voucher program. It's like, oh, you should be able to choose where your kid wants to go to school, right? Why should you be forced to? I get that. I understand that what you're saying there as the marketing, but the reality is that the good private schools do not take the vouchers. I can tell you, I've talked to researchers that they do not take them. So that means if you're going to those schools, you're already going to those schools. What the voucher creates is this other cohort of schools that are in it for the money. Yep. And they suck up all this voucher money that should have gone to the public school. And it's like taxpayer money too. So it's not like private money. It's like charter schools. It's like, it should be taxpayer money. It should go to the public schools. Do I think the public school system needs reform? Absolutely, it does. But part of the country is, in terms of like the whole American dream, is that you should be able to go to school, get a good education, and therefore work your way up. That's the whole thing. Now you're doing a gatekeeping situation. You're creating like basically a pseudo caste system, where it's like, if you don't have access to the private school, then you're not going to school anymore. Then you're going to do some other thing in life, and you just lost out on all those opportunities.
Recording. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. So I think that's another huge issue that I think, it's trending in the wrong direction. I do see a lot of public schools that are being defunded, and even though they have, I think the correct answer. So they always take, I think, nefarious people who have, a lot of money. They usually take like an issue that's true. It's like, we have a problem with the public schools. But instead of trying to fix that problem, they create a new thing that's just they're going to be able to make money off of it. I mean, the correct thing is like, okay, how do we fix public schools? Because I did a piece on this. It's like, yeah, there's way too many administrators going on in there. There's all kinds of bureaucracy happening. We need to cut that shit out of there. So that's what we need to do. We don't need to create a whole separate school of private schools that are like subprime private schools that are out there sucking all this taxpayer dollar and not providing the proper education. We need to go fix the public schools and go in and say, hey, you need to reassess your administration, because the majority of the money, I did the analysis, the majority of the money goes to administration, not the teachers. And because what happens is, like, when you work your way up in a job or something in a corporation, like, you need to grow the number of people you're managing. That's how you get prestige. So like over the course of like 75 years, like as your team grows, you need to grow it because people need to get promoted. So now you have a huge bureaucratic, I don't know, you just cohort of people in public school system that shouldn't even, those jobs don't even exist is what I'm saying. And you need to divert that money back to where it should go, which is, you know, the teachers who are doing the work.
Well, yeah, that, and I think part of that begs the question, what teachers are doing the work, right? Like, you see California decides they want to change, or they
Yes.
for an A and B, and, you know, like Carlin said, you know, eventually you're just going to need to show up with a pencil, right? Like, that's it.
Right. So the curriculum obviously is another set of issues that needs to be battled over. So I have no problem having a debate over the curriculum. Yeah, have the debate over what you should be teaching, what's the best way to educate young minds, mold young minds. Yeah, I'm happy. That's a good debate to have. The debate, but that's not really I mean, that is some of the debate, but most of it is spent on funding, where it's like, oh, we want to do this with the money and where it goes. It's like, yeah, fight it all you want about like what history you want to teach the kids. And so that happens, you know, all the time. And hopefully the, you know, democracy wins out, right? It's like you have the most number of people say, hey, we want to teach this to our kids. Okay, let's go with that.
Sorry, I keep getting
No worries, no worries. You'll cut that out.
yeah, or I'll leave it. We'll see. There's nothing of. I'm sorry. Think.
But anyways, that's my rant about education in this country.
So, do you think, you know, like, just like with education, the way uh, the infrastructure, whether it be, you know, like food processing, like all of it, right? Like, there's this net coming around it, and then some shit's just catching fire or whatever. Regardless, you know, but you're seeing that get taken under private ownership and just constricting into fewer and fewer locations and smaller pockets of ownership. And now you see it even kind of pushing out to, hey, it's not even good enough that we own all this. We want to get rid of all the natural shit like the cows and whatnot, and we want to get rid of those. And then you gotta have our super deluxe plant based bioengineer, you know, super slush, you know, like what's it just feels like everything's being bought up, and eventually, like, I feel like they're liquidating all the cash from the system, and eventually, you know, like when it bottoms out, you know, people are gonna have nothing. They'll own, you know, everything, and then they'll have to come in and basically help you get reestablished, you know. And I feel like it's intentional more than it is happenance and just bad governance or policy.
I think, yeah, I would say it's more incentive driven. That's what I think is that these businesses are incentivized to do one thing. I mean, that's what I grew up, you know, not growing up, but I was in that world for, you know, 6-7 years, and it's all about incentives. It's humans, they'll do whatever it takes to do a good job, you know, to be rewarded for that. So if you're rewarding a certain thing, then that thing is going to keep happening. And that's what happens. It's like, okay, you're going to reward, you know, we just got to grow. Every company's got to grow 10% a year. Okay, we'll find ways to grow, and whether it be good for America, not good for America. I mean, if you want to break it down, right? So here's how it works is that in every single transaction, let's say between you and me or between any company, I have to get the most out of you, and I have to give you the least to get what I'm getting from you. And so every transaction is very adversarial. It's basically a race to the bottom, right? Everybody's out to get each other. There's no there's no sense of like, hey, the U.S. A higher power, a higher entity. It's just very individualized. And so then when you have everything happen, even down to, let's say, person to person, like you and your manager, right? Your manager says, hey, I need you to come back to the office. It's like, why? We're not even having any meetings today. Well, because if I don't, then somebody else is going to get mad at me. So in that transaction, like, I have to get the most. I have to pay you the least. And I've seen this too in negotiations or in salary. It's like, how low can we pay this person and still they'll accept that pay raise, right? It's like, hey, this person's really good. We want to keep them. It's like, well, what's the lowest offer we can give them and still, have them? And that's how it works. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but what I'm saying is that's the reality. So then everybody is interacting in that way, is that I'm trying to get the most out of you while giving you the least. And so then when that happens, everybody's doing that. I don't know if that's going to be a good result.
I think you got a good perspective, man. You got a good family life, two parents, good upbringing, stuff like that. You seem pretty healthy.
No, not really. No, my parents are divorced. I had a very, I wouldn't say it's a bad upbringing. I mean, I've seen a lot worse, but it certainly wasn't the nuclear family. My dad and my mom divorced when I was in high school, but they were separated for a long time. And he was, he's not going to watch this, but he was quite the womanizer. I would have to say, I would have to say it. So that was something that I had to really grapple with, but a little later in life of what happened there. So I don't know if, yeah, uh, I think it's always good. I mean, the nuclear family, critical, but I think, it's not like a do or die situation. Like if you don't, it doesn't guarantee failure or success either way, right? You have people growing up with both parents and they turn out to be an asshole, some nepotism thing. So,
Right, right. But it can
you
help,
never know.
right? I mean,
It
there's
can help. No,
definitely
I
something to be said for it. Are
absolutely.
your family and friends, do they follow your work? Do they follow what you do? Are they supportive? How's that work in your
Um,
life?
yeah. I think my close friends, they may not follow because I don't actually talk about politics too much in friend situations. Like if I'm out there, I'm not talking their ear off about fucking Israel. It's just not what I want to do. And also I don't. That's one of the things. It's like I don't need to have this conversation. If you want to have it with me, I'm happy to have it because I'm interested in this stuff. But I don't want to make everything about like you got to do the right thing and justice and if you believe that, I can never be friends with you kind of thing. And so I have like friends. I mean, I have a lot of you could call them, Zionist friends, the Jewish Zionists, and you know, I just hope that I get reciprocated in that same way. Where hey, I'm out here and I'm not trying to cause you any. I'm not trying to have people target you. That's not my intention. I'm just trying to bring to light a particular thing that's happening out here, and and if I can give you that respect to say, hey, I respect you, you love Israel, that's all good. I don't, you can have that perspective. That's okay. Um, but I don't think, so I don't judge you for that. So I hopefully, we can all still be more or less like we can appreciate that's I mean I think that's part of my thing of like hey this is how we can heal as a country is like we don't want to need to like hate each other all the time for whatever position that they hold, whether it's something really big or really small. I think that's the direction that has been going for a little while now, and I think that's when the people who have the money, who have the power, they see that and they say hey this is how we can drive a wedge right here and then we can get whatever we want done because we have this lane. But if we don't allow that lane to exist, then they can't exploit it.
See, again, this is why you're gonna be so effective, right? Like some people want power and want a role of leadership, right? And it's usually because they're like fucking psychopaths, right? And they get off on power. And then some people are actually way more humble, right? Like they don't want that. They're not looking for it. I think you're gonna be in the latter camp, buddy. You know, I
Uh,
get that you're not looking to be in the forefront, but I think just by the nature of what you do and how you do it, you will be. And I think you're going to open up a lot of eyes. And I think that your information clearly comes from a point of careful consideration. You know, it's not just I'm throwing this out here because that's gonna get me the click. Like it's been processed. Like here, what do you think? Where's your stance on it? Like, and I think
Absolutely,
people
and I
love
do
that.
want to defend. So I do want to, like you're talking about, like potentially like grifting. There's some, that's a huge thing that happens is like people start to say stuff not because they believe it, because they're paid and it works for them. And I can kind of understand, that's another thing. It's like I can understand why people would do that, right? They're just saying, hey, this is how I make a living. It's just like that's no better or worse than some dude in white collar job at some corporation pencil pushing, even though they don't believe in it. And it's not as visible, but I would say that's also not so good. So I try not to judge people. Like, okay, if they want to do that, they want to do that. I'm gonna do my thing, and we'll kind of see what happens. Is like I'll just put it out there, and like my job is to like, hey, I'm gonna try to compete with your grift. Like if you want to do the grift thing, that's okay with me, and I'm gonna try to create a product, a video, whatever it might be, that would hopefully entice people to watch me as well, and hopefully provide that perspective. I say out of any kind of bashing or debates, or I don't like to engage in like calling people out and this kind of thing. It's really not it's really not in my nature. I don't like doing that.
Fair enough.
But
But I don't think you necessarily have to. I think it's just
yeah,
I think your work will speak to itself. I'll give you an example. This is my prediction for the future on at least on X
love it.
for you, right? I see, people like you, people like Ian, people like Laura Loomer, these people that actually generate content, right? You guys go, your boots on the ground, you're creating, you're researching your own stories, Johnny a bit more, people like that, right? Uh, you guys are kind of like the up and coming cast on back in the day Saturday Night Live when it was good. Back in the day when Joe Rogan was launching off and these the new era of comics were arising. Like there's like that Avenger group that you can see is forming and coming into its own, right? And there's a lot of people who are like really big, but it is cut and paste journalism. It's the same story, the same paragraph, the same video footage, and not a lot is different, right? They got the followers that end up going to them, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think what's going to happen, and what we're seeing happen right now, we're at the start, is that there's that hunger for that authenticity, right? Like something more than just copy and paste me some shit, like open my eyes up to something, show me something, make me question what I perceived, in a wholesome, but like, well, not wholesome necessarily, but in a real, of substance manner, and I think you guys have that, and I'm watching people flock to that more and more, and I think as, even the year goes on, like, people like you are just going to, dude, to the fucking moon, man, diamond hands.
I appreciate you saying that. And the one thing I think I more or less agree with that. And one thing that I want to see too is just more decentralization of information, right? It's not just consolidated sources of, hey, we're going to have like 3 news stations or whatever. It's like everybody is going to pitch in and do their thing. And so I think we're going to have like a lot longer tail. Like there's not going to, you don't have to have like a bajillion followers to be impactful, right? There's a lot of space to, to, to put out information, what you care about. And as long as you're doing it an effective way, in a way that's real, authentic, providing value, then there's going to be space. It's not like in the past. It's like, oh, if you come in, you have to edge somebody else out. Kind of. It's like there's only one anchor job. So if that kind of thing. It's like
Yep,
everybody can
full
kind of be an
collateral.
anchor. Exactly. So that's what I hope. And with decentralization, I think that's good because then you get more perspective. Then you get like, okay, well, I got this guy saying that guy saying that, and then you can kind of form your own opinion. And I know it's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea. It's like a lot of people don't care about politics, and that's totally fine too. And but I'm here if you ever want to listen to it. That's what I'm here to. That's my role. It's like if you want to ever get engaged a little bit, like I'm gonna create my shit where hopefully as many people as possible would enjoy it.
And, do you have a list of recommendations on whether it be websites, influencers, news sites, etc.? Like, if somebody is like, hey, I'm kind of new to this whole world, right? But I like James, and I'm coming across this. Like, where can I get trusted information, things that I can consider? You know, who can I listen to, or who's interesting? What would you say?
That's a that's a good question. I always hesitate to answer these kind of questions like this because it's like I don't want to. Everybody's kind of there's so many good people out there. But for me, I mean, obviously, like I'm very, I appreciate Ian in his Twitter space. Like he's like the go-to guy in terms of like that. Hey, if you want to know something about like behind the scenes of the CIA or corporations or whoever, all the cast of characters that's pulling the strings, that's the guy to go to. In terms of like more news, I'm biased in this way because I partner with them. I'm a contributor to the show, which would be Breaking Points. I think if that's daily news, if you want to know stuff that's going on daily, that's where I would go. In terms of like conversations, I'm still trying to find like a podcast. Like I'll listen to the Joe Rogan podcast from time to time, depending on the person that comes in. And I think I hate to say it, but I think the new Tucker, right? Post Fox Tucker is incredible.
Yep.
Just bringing on voices that you've never heard before, and you just listen to be like, okay, let me hear why fossil fuels is good. I'm like, really? Okay, we need more fossil. Okay, I'm gonna hear that. I'm like one of those people like, okay, we've always been told that we got to cut fossil fuel, but now he brings on this guy, the scientist, studying it for like 30 years, and saying, hey, no, this is information that's been hidden or whatever. And then I listen to it, I'm like, okay, because sometimes I'll listen to some things and I'll be like, I think that's fucking garbage. But sometimes I'm like, okay, that's good. But then that's the whole point, right? You can't have censorship. You can't get to the bottom of things if it's controlled. So that's what I would say off the top of my head right now. I wish I had a better, more prepared for that, but that's kind of honestly that's who I.
No, that's
That's
cool.
who I go to.
That's what I want. I'd rather you just say who comes to mind than just some prefab like, well, I fucking like this person too, so here he is. It's not to take away that you like somebody any less, but it's just what comes to the forefront, most likely what's impactful, right? So.
Yeah, that's those are the people. Oh, another one I think I listen to is she has the talk show Kim Iverson. I think she brings on some cool guests. I don't know if you've heard of her.
I have.
Yeah, so I think she's also really good at being just like a critical thinker as well. I like people who seem to be critically thinking, or at least giving me information that I haven't heard. I don't like it when I'm going to tune into a show and I know exactly what you're going to say about a particular thing.
That there's no expanding of the horizon, just kind of preaching to the choir kind of shit.
Yeah, exactly. Like I like, folks who aren't afraid to bring on guests that might be wrong. Like that guest might be full of shit potentially, but let me hear it out.
No, that's awesome, man. I don't want to eat up too much of your time because you got a life and whatnot, but I absolutely appreciate you coming through and doing an interview with me, which is solid for me, right? Because it was kind of a lopsided thing, but I love your work, and I'm glad I got introduced to you. And anybody who's watching this, I completely 100% can endorse. Go over on X. What's your handle on X, James?
5149 James Lee. 5149 James Lee. Lee spelled with an I. I say this every single time I go because it's spelled with an I. And every time I go to like a grocery store or wherever, bank, I'm like, okay, what's your name? James Lee. Lee with an I.
And then that's the same thing on YouTube as well, right? It's 51.
Yeah, it's all the same. So YouTube, X, Instagram, and TikTok, all the same handle. 5149 James Lee. I'll give you a funny. So I'll end. This is actually perfect timing because I have 3% left on this battery here. Is the where that 5149 came from is a really good friend of mine. He came up with that when we met at business school, and I would be like the guy who's saying shit just like out loud when people are kind of thinking I'm just like saying it, and he's like you're kind of on the pulse. He's like 51% of the time, like people are, it's okay. 49% of the time, the other person's going to be extremely offended. So he's like, you're just kind of towing that line of like, it's definitely something that people are thinking, but you're going to offend a few people as well. And that's where that came from in terms of my channel name.
Well, I love it. I appreciate you sharing with me. Give me 1 second of your time. I'm gonna shut this down. I just want to say something to you off the air,
Yeah,
but brother, I absolutely appreciate you, and I wish you continued success. You deserve it. You know, your work
appreciate
stands
it,
on its
Kelly.
own.
Yeah, appreciate you for having me on.